November of 2017. The Sarah Smith Band is on its inaugural tour of Europe, and it rolls into the beautiful medieval town of Eisenach, Germany. There to have a day and a show that will live long in Sarah Smith tour legend, owing to a palm reader and some glitter and a crazy crowd and a bass player almost having his finger ripped off. And I tell you all of that, and you, discerning listener, have the natural reaction, which is, cool story, bruh, but I don't really see how that connects to the Protestant Reformation. But I'm here to tell you that in a fun way it does, and I shall attempt to wax semi-eloquent about it on this episode. There are just a lot of fun layers to this one, a lot of really interesting kind of synchronicities. For example, the whole idea for this episode finds its genesis, if you'll allow an ecclesiastical pun, in a band situation. So last weekend, the Fresh Breath Band gets together. We're rehearsing for a gig, and after rehearsal's over, we're loading out. And as typically happens, we get into a conversation, and we will find ourselves, like most bands, in discussion of geopolitics, philosophy, religion, exegesis, and somehow, I'm not even quite sure how, the topic of indulgences came up. I think we were talking probably about, in broad terms, corruption, overreach, abuse of power, none of which we know has any relevance remotely to life in the year 2025. But we were talking about it in abstract terms because we are all philosophers, and I mentioned the Catholic practice of granting indulgences. Let me lay some history for you. Let me lay some foundation. So way back in the day, thinkers within the Catholic Church got to noodling over this concept of purgatory. The idea was that you don't necessarily automatically go to heaven after you die. Some people do, all right? There are super Catholics out there. Your Mother's Teresa, your Catholics who probably worked on the Sesame Street show, people who lived faithfully, lived sincerely, practiced their faith, were living examples of their faith. They get the fast track to heaven when they die, okay? Similarly, those who are not destined for heaven find themselves immediately upon the highway to hell. That's your Hitlers, that's your Genghis Khan, that's whoever invented line dancing. The extremes in either scenario, fast tracks to heaven, fast track to hell. But as you know, kids, most of us don't belong in the extremes. The vast majority of people find themselves somewhere in the middle. As far as the Catholic Church was concerned, anybody who was a sinner was in the extreme. Very black and white with that. If you're not bound for heaven, you're bound for hell. But those who are bound for heaven, there are degrees here, all right? There are shades. Let's say there are shades. Super Catholics straight into heaven, but the rest of us who are fundamentally good people, not necessarily heaven-worthy yet. And so theologians in the Catholic Church began to noodle over, well, what happens to those people after they die? Because they're not worthy of heaven. They're not worthy of hell either. They're somewhere in the middle. And so there must be some place where souls go to fundamentally burn off, purify, a crucible of sorts, burn off those sins that aren't enough to get you in hell, but aren't quite enough. You haven't got quite enough purity to get yourself to heaven. So there must be a place in the middle where you could, dare I use the language of another faith tradition, burn off that karma. And so they started coming up with this idea of what they called purgatory. Purgatory is a place where your soul will go after you die to burn off the sins. Not a pleasant process, by the way, or at least not sold as a pleasant process, and I use that word very deliberately. Place where you go to spend some time purifying so that you are worthy to get into heaven. And the amount of time you got to spend there depends very much upon the sins you've accumulated in your life, the crust that you've got built upon you. But then somebody said, well, maybe there's a way that you can reduce the amount of time you've got to spend in purgatory by the things you do in this life. And so this concept of indulgences came into being. If you do stuff that we think is good, we'll write you a little ticket, take some of the time off of your sentence, fundamentally. And the idea initially was very much based upon works. It's kind of like time off for good behavior. So if you did good stuff in the world, if you demonstrated your faith, acted upon it in charitable ways, we'll write you a ticket, take some time off of the time you have to spend in purgatory. These were called indulgences. So you could apply to the church, to your local church. Say, I went out and I handed out pamphlets and I scrubbed the graffiti off the walls of the church. That's got to be worth 10 or 15 minutes off of purgatory, right? They'd start giving you indulgences. Well, it did not take long, kids, before somebody said, can I just, buy one? Can I just buy a little bit of time off in purgatory? And they looked around and said, that's not a bad idea. And some of the more enterprising individuals within the church hierarchy started seeing this as a bit of a gold mine, man. Hey, people are going to pay us to take some of those sins off the records, pay us to look the other way. An ecclesiastical bribe, as it were. And so it became more fashionable to offer cash indulgences. Come and give us the money. We'll take some time off your purgatory for you. All seems very legit to me. Business is business, the business of souls. As this practice becomes more popular, the church begins to realize, hey, we can make a lot of money this way. Like a lot of money. And they begin to make a lot of money. And then this really ramps up during the time of the Crusades, religious wars with Muslims for the most part. It's like wars cost a lot of money and we need soldiers. And so can we go around recruiting via indulgence? It's like, hey, you want to skip right past purgatory? Come fight for us in the Crusades. Join up now. The Pope needs you. And so during the Crusades, which went on for hundreds of years, and there were many Crusades, and they were horrendous, and I don't have time to talk about the Crusades right now, but this became a real great recruiting pitch. Thou shalt have treasures in heaven, as it were, if you come fight for me here on earth. Again, all very legit. And so they signed up in their thousands to go fight the Crusades, holy wars, and, getting a little bit of time off in the afterlife. Pretty good deal, right? And so over time, this concept of indulgences becomes ingrained. It becomes, by certain metrics, more and more corrupt. And the Catholic Church is raking in millions, man. And using that to fund their church projects and building stuff and whatever. Church is very, 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 very powerful. It all seems well and good. But it doesn't sit perfectly right with just everybody. And one of the people with whom it did not sit perfectly right was this cat called Martin Luther. Martin Luther is a priest a lecturer in theology at the University of Wittenberg in Germany. And he's an interesting cat. Okay, Luther was born in Eisleben, Germany. Grew up in a town called Mansfeld. He was the son of a successful miner. M-I-N-E-R. Son of a successful miner who, when his son was born, said, I want my son to go a step beyond me. All right, I am successful in business. I am a miner. I am industrial, but I want my son to go into something that has higher social status, has higher influence, has higher potential. I want him to step up the ladder. I want him to become a lawyer. Okay. Becoming a lawyer means being very educated. And Martin Luther's father is looking around at the local schools and he's saying, I don't think these schools are that great, man. I'm not sure my son can become the great lawyer, the great intellectual that he's destined to be by going to school here around Mansfeld. Better send him to where they have better schools. Better send him, you guessed it, to Eisenach. Oh yeah, kids, Eisenach. Gonna send Martin Luther as a teenager to study Latin, to study in the better schools in Eisenach, Germany. Martin Luther, born 1483, so it's around the year 1500 that this cat is going off to Eisenach. 500 years and change later, upon the same streets rolls the Sprinter van carrying the Sarah Smith Band. The same damn streets, kids, and I suspect Martin Luther's experience of living and studying in Eisenach somewhat different than the experience we had, because our experience was bloody mayhem, okay? We rolled in not having any idea what to expect. That was the nature of the entire tour. We started, I think, on the 1st of November, actually. I remember flying on Halloween of 2017. And we were a couple weeks into the tour by the time we got to Eisenach, so we were getting the lay of the land a little bit, but every new town, every new venue was a new experience. And so we were booked to play Club Schorschel. Do not ask me to spell that for you. This tiny, tiny, tiny little bar on a street corner off of the square in Eisenach, Germany. Gorgeous town. Just a beautiful, beautiful medieval city with the town square and the whole damn thing. Picturesque, beautiful. And if you want to talk picturesque and beautiful, look no further than the proprietor of Schorschel, Carolyn, who met us when we got there. Tall, beautiful, willowy, ethereal Caroline. It's kind of a French way of saying it. Carolyn. Carolyn, who it turns out is a palm reader, or at least claims to be one. And she looks the part. And so we're enamored of Carolyn, and we load in to this tiny, tiny, tiny little bar called Schorschel. And they say to us that the other proprietor is having a birthday party there tonight. And they are in anticipation of about 100 people showing up to celebrate his birthday. And we're looking around the club, which we think holds maybe 40? Maybe 40 comfortably in this place. We're going to cram 100 people in here tonight for a damn birthday party. And after we're done playing, there's going to be a DJ. Woo! And we're like, oh boy, this could be something. And it was. So we're hanging around. We load in, we sound check. We're hanging around. We're upstairs in what amounts to the green room. Just getting ready, just doing whatever. Along comes Carolyn, claiming to be a palm reader. And so she begins to read the palms. And first she reads the palm of Denny Gautier. The great Denny Gautier, who is playing lead guitar for Sarah at that point in the band. And Denny has got this strong, masculine hand. Denny's hands are huge. the hands of a man meant for using his hands, you know? They wrap around the neck of a guitar like a gorilla's hands. And so she picks at Denny's hand and she looks at it and she looks at him and she says, "You are going to be world famous." I recognize a flirtation when I see one, but not a bad thing for a palm reader to say. "Denny boy, you are going to be world famous," which could happen. And then I'm like, I get to be next. And she takes my hand, she looks at it, and then she looks into my eyes with those eyes of hers that see 1,000 miles deep and could make you melt in your shoes. And she says, "You will get a haircut." I recognize a lack of flirtation when I see one. But she was right. She was right. I did, in fact, later get a haircut. So we had this weird experience with Carolyn. And then we're getting ready and somehow glitter comes. I don't know where the glitter came from, but all of a sudden there was just glitter. And we're getting glittered up for this gig. And those of you who follow the Sarah Band in Europe will recall that we suddenly became colloquially known as Sarah and the Glitter Boys. The Glitter Boys were born that night in Eisenach, Germany. And they're throwing glitter on us. They're getting us ready. It was weird. Very, very weird. There was an intense, strange, hyped energy around this whole thing. Maybe it's because Carolyn's a palm reader and she had spirit at her command. But there was just a vibe happening. This is beautiful. It's a tiny club. It's in a beautiful old building. These huge double doors at the side where we loaded in. Huge, old, ancient. If you've not been to Europe, maybe you can't picture this. But if you have, you know what I'm talking about. These buildings that are just lining the street that were built in 1200 or 1642. Old buildings that are beautiful. And then inside, that's staircases. And it's just gorgeous. We're getting glittered up. We're getting ready. Then we come down to play the gig. And it's chaos in there. They do indeed have their 100 people crammed into this room. Gotta be a fire hazard. Gotta be a violation. But it's a party. People are there. And they're right in our face. Like, I have photographs of Sarah singing and people literally a foot from her head standing in front of her. There's no stage in this place. You couldn't possibly. We did play a place in Dusseldorf where it was an even smaller, I think, jazz bar. And they actually pulled out planks and put them on top of a table and made a stage out of that and put us on it. That was dicey, but a great club. Schorschel, no stage. We're just set up on the floor and people are crowded all over. They're practically on top of us. Quite literally, Sarah's singing into somebody whose face is like 8 inches from her. And when you're in that situation, you can go a couple of ways with it. You can sort of be intimidated and put off, and it's like, this is weird. Or you can soak up the energy, surrender to it, and throw yourself into the gig. And that's what we did. And one of the most famous photos ever taken of the Sarah Band performing in Europe was taken that night. And I think I might have taken it from the drum set because Denny was in the crowd. Denny was in the crowd playing guitar. He's just amongst the people playing guitar because where else could you be? And we just surrendered to this wild energy and we played loud. And I remember it's like, I don't know, 8 years ago now. I remember it being just a loud, raucous, good show. People loved it. They were singing along to the covers. We had some friends there. It was just this crazy, ebullient, nutso energy. Problem with crazy, ebullient, nutso energy, though, is that if there's not a lid kept on it, it can very quickly turn into a wildfire. And we're savvy enough to recognize when the energy's reaching maybe a dangerous kind of place. So we get to the end of our show. It's sweaty. It's nuts. We're all kind of high on this weird dopamine, this weird energy. And we're trying to load out our stuff through this crowd of people. Almost impossible. It was crazy in there. And a DJ's coming in and the dance party is going to start. And European dance parties, I don't know, man. I don't know quite what to say about that on a family show. But the energy's feeling nuts, and there's a general consensus unspoken amongst the band that if we stay here, stuff could get pretty nuts. And they wanted us to stay there. Thing about being in the band is that everybody wants to party with the band. This is what happens. This tour black hole happens where every night it's a party because every night the people want to party. The problem is for the people, it's one night. For the band, it's 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months, 8 months of every night. And you can just go into a black hole where you're just partying every night. And that's really, really bad for you. And bad habits begin to happen when you let yourself fall into that trap. And so we were looking at, well, we're debating it. It's like, this is fun. And we were 2 weeks into Germany. This is all brand new. I don't know if we had yet a night quite like that, where it was really popping, where there was a lot of people, where there was a party atmosphere, where we're going to go off maybe. We hadn't done that. Do we want to do that? A little. And so we're thinking about it as we're loading out. And it's like, should we stay? If we stay, have we got each other's backs here? If we stay, what's the line? Like, how nuts could this get? We don't know, but we're curious. And so we're having this debate, and we're loading out, and then somehow on that huge medieval double door I'm talking about, Ken the Zen, the bass player in Sarah's band, perhaps not coincidentally, also the bass player in Fresh Breath. And so, again, the origins of this episode tie Ken the Zen to two places. Fun, right? Somehow, Ken the Zen gets his hand caught in the door handle, this huge, heavy door handle, or the door itself, and it's the ring finger on his left hand, which gets just totally ripped. I think he had a wedding tattoo on that finger, which basically got ripped off. His hand got stuck in the door somehow, pulling it out, ripped the skin right off his damn finger, and had things gone slightly differently, may have ripped off the finger itself. It was heinous. Bad injury that we took as an omen. And the omen was, we better get out of here, because I'm not sure we can handle this whole scene. And so we made the decision to exit and not hang around for the big party that was about to pop off at Schorschel. But what a night we had. The glitter, the palm reader, the crazy gonzo friggin' show we had, and then Ken nearly ripping the finger off his friggin' hand. The picture of Denny, a memorable night in Eisenach. And you ask yourself, did Martin Luther have such a night? Did he, at some point, go down with his boys to what would become Schorschel and have 10 pints of ale and go off on a lute player? And who knows? Somehow, I doubt it. Martin Luther does his studies in Eisenach, walking the very same streets, perhaps, that we walked the morning after that show. And subsequently, when we returned to play in Eisenach a couple more times. Beautiful, beautiful little city. A wonderful town square. I remember having coffee, breakfast the morning after that show, just sitting on the edge of the town square at a cafe. So European, and one of the things that I desperately miss about being in Europe is town squares, especially in little towns like that. We played a lot of little towns, and every one of them has a town square. And in the morning, people are just at the cafe, and at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, people are at the cafe. We would marvel about this. Every town we rolled into in the afternoon, everybody's out at the town square having a coffee. And it's like, don't you people work? No, not if they don't feel like it. Not in the afternoon. It's time for a coffee. And it's one of the reasons that I need to live there. I'm just realizing it right now. Somebody help me make this happen. Martin Luther studies there for a few years, gets brushed up on his Latin, then enrolls in the University of Erfurt, Germany, there to study law. And so he gets, a couple years into his practice of studying law, getting ready for this law career, and then something very interesting happens. The sort of thing that only happens to these characters we remember throughout history. This is 500 years ago. Martin Luther's out and about, gets caught in a thunderstorm. And a bolt of lightning hits so near him that he throws himself to the ground, screaming, "Just save me. I promise I'll become a monk." One of those ones. Save me, God, and I'll change my ways, you know? Martin Luther does one of those. I'll become a monk. Now, he had always been a devout person. He had always been a spiritually inclined person. But, you know, the prestige wasn't so much in ecumenical studies. The prestige wasn't so much in the church. It was in the law. His dad wanted the prestige. Save me and I'll become a monk. And he survived that. And true to his word, this is another thing about Martin Luther. Integrity to a fault. It's like, I made a promise to God I would become a monk if they saved me, if he saved me from this storm. I've been saved. I am a man of my word. And so he switches over and enrolls in theology with the goal of becoming a monk, becoming a priest. And his dad is bloody furious. What the hell are you doing? You're supposed to be a lawyer. A priest? Martin Luther does it anyway. Man of principle, man of integrity. I gave my vow and I shall see it through. And so he studies. He becomes ordained as a priest. He is a theologian. He gets hired to go and teach at the University of Wittenberg. He's going to teach theology. He's going to teach religion. And off he goes on this academic career. But Martin Luther is taking a look around at what's going on. And there's stuff within the Catholic Church that he doesn't quite like theologically. Now, his experience was a very personal one. A lightning bolt nearly took him out. He made a promise himself personally to God. I'll become a monk if you save me. This is a personal connection to the deity. Catholic Church didn't work that way. Catholic Church says you have a connection to God through the clergy, right? Through the priest, through the bishops, through the Pope. We are your conduit to God. Martin Luther's like, no, I don't think so. I think the conduit should be directly to God. And this was a type of heresy, but he had this sort of stuff floating around in the back of his head. He had questions about the theology. He had questions about the arrangement of the Catholic Church. What it needed to blow up was kind of a touchstone, kind of an issue. And so along comes 1517. Martin Luther is well established as a professor, as a priest, as a monk, a holy man, a writer, a philosopher. And this indulgences thing is really becoming pretty smarmy at this point. The Pope Leo X, wants to make some repairs on St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. I have been recently to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and I took a look around it and I thought, why is there so much wealth in this church that could do so much more good being distributed to the friggin' poor people of the world? Martin Luther felt, in a certain sense, the same way. Men of integrity, Martin Luther and me. So the Pope wants to make a bunch of repairs and upgrades to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Doesn't want to pay for it all that much. You know what we can do? Sell some indulgences. Oh yeah, we'll let the people pay for it. And so he sends around this friar called Johann Tetzel. And Tetzel is basically the marketing guy for indulgences. So he's going around what is at that point in time the Holy Roman Empire, not to be confused with the Roman Empire. As the philosopher Voltaire said, the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. The Roman Empire that we think of from the time pre- and post-Christendom, led by the Julius Caesars, these really strong emperors, covered almost all of the known world at the time. parts of Africa, the Middle East, much of Europe, all led from Rome by a strong emperor. The Holy Roman Empire, which is 1,000 years or so, list at least is 1,000 years after the quote-unquote fall of the Roman Empire, just borrowed the name. All right, a lot of the power was centralized still in the church, and that was operating out of Rome, and so they claimed that, right? We are the Roman Empire with the Roman Church. And it was led by an elected emperor called Charles V at the time of Martin Luther. Charles V is the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, which in power bears almost no resemblance to the real Roman emperors. The Holy Roman Empire is mostly based around Central Europe. Okay, the territory covers northern Italy, much of Germany, Austria, Netherlands, Belgium, but it's not a unified empire. It's a whole patchwork, a whole tapestry of kingdoms and city-states and fiefdoms and little territories with a bunch of little rulers and whatever. It's a patchwork. It's a quilt. All right, it is not an empire. But that's where Germany is, and that's where Martin Luther finds himself. And the Pope, who's running the show on the religious side, Leo X, wants to update St. Peter's Basilica. Needs money to do it. He's going to send Tetzel around the Holy Roman Empire soliciting money. And there was this really fun saying that got attributed to, I don't know if it's attributed directly to Tetzel or just part of the marketing, which was something to the effect of, as soon as the coin in coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Great slogan, man. And so Tetzel's going around and he's selling indulgences to everybody he can find in every town and city throughout the entire Holy Roman Empire. Got to raise that money to make the upgrades to St. Peter's Basilica. They're doing it in really sinister ways. They're going up to people and saying, hey, I heard your sister just died. You know, you can reduce her time in purgatory. You can reduce her suffering if you buy an indulgence on her behalf, if you put it on her tab. And why wouldn't you do that? You know, how could you be so heartless as to not take some of your money and ease the burden that your relative is suffering in purgatory right now? And people went for it. Right? People had their heartstrings pulled upon. And so Tetzel's going around doing this stuff, raising tons of money, ostensibly for the Pope, so he can do what he wants to do with it. Martin Luther's looking at this and he's like, a couple things wrong with this. A, you're really exploiting poor people. Right? People do not have the money to give you. They can't afford it. And you're playing upon their emotions. You are guilting them. You are frightening them into giving you what little money they have. It's immoral and it's wrong. And by the way, indulgences are not real faith. Right? Martin Luther's whole thing is that we are saved. Our salvation lies in our sincere, genuine faith, our belief in God. That is what gives us salvation, not an indulgence, not a priest, not even the church. These are heretical comments, heretical ways of thinking. But he's a rebel and he's sincere. His own faith was sincere. And he's saying the whole structure is wrong here. Our salvation lies in faith. It does not lie in giving money to the friggin' Pope. This is wrong. This is a blasphemy. Martin Luther doesn't like it. There's a bunch of stuff Martin Luther doesn't like. And so he watches this indulgences train going around to funnel a bunch of money to the Pope so he can upgrade this magnificent church palace, St. Peter's Basilica. Doesn't like it. And so at a certain point, it bothers him enough that he writes up what has become known as the 95 Theses. These are basically 95 reasons why the church is effing it up and it's wrong. Heavy stuff, man. And so he takes his 95 Theses, and legend has it, he nails it to the door of the church in Wittenberg. You can picture that. Walks up, nails it to the door of the church. When I was in university, somewhere, my first year, I lived in residence. We had the meal plan. Food wasn't great in the cafeteria where we were allowed to use the meal plan. And legend has it one day, there was like a comments board, a cork comments board in the cafeteria. Leave your comments here. One day, somebody took a steak and a steak knife and drilled that steak knife through the steak onto the board. This is my comment. Reminds me of Martin Luther with his 95 Theses, which were fundamentally aimed at this is why indulgences are wrong and a blasphemy, and this is a bunch of other stuff that the church is getting wrong. Absolute friggin' scandal. Scandal! Nobody speaks out this way against the church, all right? The Holy Roman Empire was not the Roman Empire. Probably the Roman Empire, they just would have come along and cut his head off. Holy Roman Empire doesn't have quite that much power. And Martin Luther is a person of some repute, or he's becoming that, and he's about to explode. All right, he's going to go viral. He's going to go viral. Why? Because this is the time of the printing press. All right? You couldn't really distribute information all that much back in the day. It's one of the reasons why Catholic priests held so much of the ecclesiastical power. A lot of people couldn't read. And B, it was all in Latin. And C, you just couldn't distribute information so easily. It was very, very tough to copy it and get it out there. Difficult, expensive, time-consuming. Printing press changed all that. Printing press, you could start to like and share. And the 95 Theses get picked up real quick, copied, distributed everywhere. All right, this thing takes off like a wildfire. Did you see what that priest said? Holy crap! No pun intended. And obviously, this is going to raise the ire of the church. It also raised the ire of the emperor, Charles V, a devout Catholic and a defender of the church himself. So the church comes along and says, Martin, nichts so gut, man. What gives? They want him to recant. There's a diet, D-I-E-T, a meeting, a council meeting in Augsburg. And they pull up Martin Luther and they say, we saw your little treatise here, buddy. Better recant or we're going to excommunicate you. Not a great thing for a person whose job is being a Catholic priest. Martin Luther won't recant. He's a man of principle. He is a man of integrity. He's like, this is what I actually think. And he actually steps it up a bit, begins to talk more publicly, challenging papal authority, challenging the primacy of the church at all in spiritual matters. Heavy-duty heresy, man. He won't recant at Augsburg. And so the Pope, in response, issues the Exsurge Domine. Now, I'm not saying that right. I speak no Latin. Ich spreche kein Latin. Threatening to excommunicate Martin Luther. All right? Here's my decree. You recant or you're out. Martin Luther takes the decree, which is a piece of paper. It's not an email. Takes the piece of paper, publicly burns it. What a badass Martin Luther is. It's what I think, Pope. I'm taking your decree threatening me, and I'm going to burn it right here where everybody can see. Crazy stuff, man. And empowering those people who also had questions about the church, questions about all the money the church was making. And very interesting to a lot of those small princes, small warlords, small leaders of city-states who also wouldn't mind getting out from underneath the thumb of the church which is sucking up all their money in tithes, the church which owns all of this tremendous land that some of those landowners wouldn't mind owning themselves. It's like, here's a guy who's standing up in ways that nobody ever has. We can get behind that. And so there are rumblings beginning to happen throughout the Holy Roman Empire of turning against the church and turning against other forms of authority. We're looking at you, Emperor Charles V. 1518 is the Diet of Augsburg. And this goes on for a few years, all right? Martin Luther keeps writing. Martin Luther keeps talking about the reforms he would like to see, keeps challenging papal authority, burns up the threat of excommunication. Sensational stuff, man. Real controversy. 1521, there's another Diet. There's another council meeting. This is the Diet of Worms, which when you read it in English is the Diet of Worms. And I don't know if there's symbolism in that or not. Perhaps there is. Once again, Martin Luther, you will recant your 95 Theses. You will say you're sorry. You'll say you didn't mean it. And again, Martin Luther does not recant. And he says the famous line, "Here I stand. I can do no other." Here I stand. I will do nothing but stand here in front of you. Bold, courageous, man. And so the Pope says, all right, Jack, you're excommunicated. You're a heretic. And you know what that means? People can kill you. Calling somebody a heretic formally meant it's open season on you, Martin Luther. You can be killed by anybody, and we'll look the other way. We'll probably hand over an indulgence for it. So enjoy. And so Martin Luther exits his little trial, and he's trying to get away. And you'll recall that I said, though, there were people out there who were beginning to think the same way. There were people out there in positions of power who supported what Martin Luther had to say about this stuff. Some of them, quote unquote, kidnapped him on the way home from his trial. And where did they take him, kids? They took him to Eisenach. In much the same way that I was shuttled into Eisenach in a Sprinter van, Martin Luther was shuttled into Eisenach under cover of darkness in the back of a wagon, I assume, to hide out until it all blows over. Because people, hey, there's a bounty on this guy. I can get treasures in heaven if I cut this dude's head off. He's a heretic. Better hide him. So they take him back to Eisenach, and they hide him in Wartburg Castle. Wartburg Castle, which is still there, overlooks the city. And he goes to hide in Wartburg Castle, and he assumes the identity of Junker Jorg. The Knight George, Junker Jorg. And I believe our word for jokers, as in jokers in a deck of cards, comes from Junker, a knight. Also, the word euchre, I think, derives from that as well. I did an episode on that some time ago. An episode about playing cards. Martin Luther goes to hide, assumes the identity of Junker Jorg in Wartburg Castle, overlooking Eisenach. And again, there's the parallel, man. There is my connection to the Protestant Reformation. What happens? Martin Luther sets to work translating the New Testament into German, into a language where people can read it. His whole thing, the whole Protestant movement, was about removing the middleman, right? The Catholic clergy, the Catholic Church, existed as a middleman between you and God. Martin Luther, the entire Protestant movement was about there doesn't need to be a middleman. We all have a connection to God. Get rid of the church. All the church is doing is sucking up a lot of people's money, making a lot of rules, making people suffer. Get rid of the church. We can be, as clergy, guides and aids and help. But the relationship to God, the relationship to Christ is personal between a person and God. It needs no intermediary. And one of the ways in which I said the church was gatekeeping this stuff was by being the only people who had access to the information and the only people who could read it, and therefore the only people who could explain it. And so they could say whatever they wanted. You know, they could exploit people in any number of ways by being the only people with access to the information and not letting others see it. You're a peasant. You're like, I'd like to know more about that. We'll tell you. We'll tell you what you need to know. Martin Luther sets about translating the New Testament into German. And again, with the printing press, you can disseminate it. You can share it around. So Martin Luther is making the information accessible to people and encouraging them to build their own relationship with God, quite apart from the tenets of the church itself. He didn't set out to start a revolution, by the way. When he put up the 95 Theses, he wasn't trying to start a war, which literally did eventually start a war. He was trying to start a dialogue. It's like, no, I still love the church. I just think we're doing it wrong, and here's the ways in which it could be better. But it blew up, and it blew up because it went viral, and it blew up because of the controversy with the Pope and Charles V, again, the emperor, who's the defender of the church. And it went viral in a way. And then, as I said, there were people who could see the advantages of being out from underneath the church's thumb, out from underneath the emperor's thumb, right? All these little princes who run these little kingdoms that are loosely connected as the Holy Roman Empire, they're like, we want that tax money, right? That tithe money that's going to the church somewhere in Italy, which we've never been to. We want that money. We want the power and influence over the people in our own little kingdom. We want all that terrific land that the church owns. There's a lot of reasons to support, protect Martin Luther. And Charles V would like nothing more than to cut his bloody head off. But Charles V, doesn't have all that much power. This is a loosely held together kingdom. And he's busy fighting wars because the bloody French are on the other side, and they're always picking fights. And on the other side is the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. They're always picking fights. And so Charles V is always wrapped up in wars with people. He hasn't got time to focus on this thorn in his paw, this pain in the butt, Martin Luther. And so they're content-ish to let it lie, especially when they're not quite sure where he is. There's this guy, Junker Jorg, whoever that is. He's burrowed away in a castle in Eisenach. And what happens, though, is that the church really begins to fracture. As time goes by, a lot of these little princes renounce the Catholic Church, adopt what's becoming known as the Lutheran Church. Maybe you're familiar with that. And then, because it's politically convenient and economically convenient in a lot of cases, we're going to throw off the church, we're going to throw off the emperor. We're going to adopt this Protestant thing, and we're going to keep all the power and land and money. And of course, wars begin to break out. Wars break out between Catholic-controlled territories and Protestant-controlled territories, and this enormous infighting begins to happen. When you cut the head off the snake, kids, the infighting begins to happen. And so it did, and so it does. I mean, we still had Catholics and Protestants fighting each other in Ireland within our own memory, the troubles in Ireland. It continues now. Look no further than the Scottish Premier League, where Rangers and Celtic, both of Glasgow, have arguably the bitterest rivalry in sport, because Celtic was founded by Catholics and Rangers was founded by Protestants. It runs deep, man, and it still continues. I remember being a kid in the evangelical church, which is Protestant, being warned against Catholics. Wild stuff. And people don't question, right? People don't question. They just take, for the most part, what they're told, and they follow in the tradition. And so it perpetuates. All this goes back to Martin Luther and indulgences and the tiny, sleepy, beautiful medieval city of Eisenach, Germany, which I have visited and loved and look forward to visiting again. And what is this episode? It's me trying to be semi-eloquent, but it's a throw, it's a toss, it's an indulgence offered to those of you who liked it when I used to do histories. And so hopefully, if things continue, I'll have more time to put into doing histories. I was going to do a music recommendation this week. I'm going to save it. I got a couple really good ones, actually. Some people who I really, really enjoy. A couple different artists have released records in the past week, and terrific stuff. I don't have time. I have to get back to my regular job, and then I got to edit this thing and get it ready. Yeah, Eisenach, Germany. Beautiful city. Go if you can. It's weird how you connect to history. It's weird how you connect to history. I walk the same streets as Martin Luther, and his impact on the world as we know it is enormous, probably more enormous than we even realize. So there's your lot for this week. Thank you ever so much for listening. Hey, do me a favor, subscribe if you haven't on the places where you listen, and do me a real solid, kids. All right, my birthday's coming up. If you want to get me something extra special, if you want to purchase an indulgence from me, you can do so with a rating and review on Apple. I haven't had one in a long time, and I'd like one or 2 or 10. It helps. All right, it helps the show get discovered. It is very, very difficult as an indie to break through all of the noise. I do not have an advertising budget. I can't compete with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. So every little bit helps. Share these episodes, please. Tell your friends. Ratings and reviews, always most welcome. And I'm going to go, all right? Remember that good things happen when you put yourself out there. I will be back next week with something. I don't know what it is. Along the way, we'll figure it out. Until then, do take care, and we'll talk to you soon.